Welcome, Archana.
Thank you, Saujanya.
And on behalf of Pink Ladder, we're really proud to host you for this Step Up session. Um, for those of you watching, I will just do a brief introduction on Archana Venkat. She has a career spanning over 14 years and has led initiatives that have resulted in triple-digit return on investment through new business development, innovation, enhanced customer experience, and improved brand visibility. Her key skills include marketing strategy, innovation, customer journey mapping, customer experience, marketing and analytics, digital marketing, and brand development. She's passionate, and this is something that's close to Pink Ladder's heart. She's passionate about helping women advance in their careers. And in 2017, she founded the Women Leaders of Sajapur Road, a lean circle. And Archana regularly speaks and writes on issues impacting opportunities for women at the workplace and how they can effectively manage their careers. And she's also, most importantly, the author of Seize Your Career, a book documenting the experiences of women in white-collar jobs. I would recommend that people go out there and pick up her book and read it. So, Archana, shall we start? And what I would
Yes,
start.
Saujanya. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. What is the book about? If you could spend a few minutes telling us what the book is about and how is it different from, there are a lot of books on this subject. So what makes this book stand out?
Okay. So the book is a culmination of my interactions with over 200 women in the last 4 years, many of who have been a part of my own lean-in circle, the Women Leaders of Sarjapur Road. The others I have met as part of other interactions, social and professional, that I've had. I've had the privilege of them sharing some of their career challenges and their career journeys with me. So the book essentially is a culmination of 10 case studies or short stories that discuss some of the key challenges that women in mid to senior positions in white collar organizations experience. Now, this includes a variety of issues, starting with if you are at a mid-level position, what do you really need to go to the next level? So issues around negotiating, whether it's for pay, it's for promotion, or it's for a lucrative project that builds visibility for your work within the organization. It talks about issues around returning to work. In the last 2-3 years, we've heard a lot about returnship programs, but there are 2 stories there that talk about different aspects of returnship programs and what do you really need to do to successfully make a comeback. Okay. It also touches upon issues around benevolent sexism, tackling conflicting feedback that women are often given. Yes. And what happens when 2 women work with each other? What are the dynamics that sort of come into play?
Yes.
Right? So these are all case studies. I have consciously stayed away from prescribing an approach that will work for women because women's career journeys are very unique. What women want from work is itself something that's not standardized. So the book doesn't prescribe an approach that they could take. What it does instead is it gives people an option to introspect through questions on what could have been done differently as far as this scenario was concerned. And it enables them to make those choices should they confront a situation like that at their workplace or in their career journeys. That is how this book is very different. You're right. There are enough books which have come out which sort of propagate one approach versus the other approach in terms of what has worked for a bunch of women and what has not. And I have consciously stayed away from doing that because sometimes the dynamics at work are very different for different women professionals. And a very unilateral perspective, especially a very Western unilateral perspective, often doesn't really work very well in an Indian context, even if you work for an MNC. So that is how, yeah.
That's extremely interesting because, yes, I absolutely agree with you. One of the things that we find constantly is a one shoe fits all approach rarely works. And while your scenario at the workplace may be the same, your social conditioning may be different, or your social conditioning may be same, but your scenario may be different.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Just a slight extension of it is, who is the type of woman, or what, who should be buying this book? Who have you targeted this book towards?
Okay. This book is primarily for any woman who's looking at career progression. It is also for any professional who is invested in a woman's career progression. Now, whether that's a HR professional working for an organization, or it's a male ally, a
Yeah.
manager who wants his woman reportee to rise up the ladder, it's a spouse who wants the wife or the partner to do well at work and wants to be supportive. It is
Yeah.
for primarily these two categories of people.
Okay, so then I'll move on to the next thing is, what in your opinion do what do you believe women should do to succeed in their careers and their workplaces?
Okay, okay. See, the definition of career success itself varies from woman to woman, right? But
Yes.
having said that, if you're generally someone who's looking to progress and move up the ladder, there are a bunch of skills that you need to start exercising. Okay. The first is start taking calculated risks, whether it is a calculated risk in terms of a certain kind of a client that you want to work with, or a certain kind of a job that you want to do. Taking
Yes.
calculated risks will demonstrate that you are not afraid of taking decisions, difficult decisions, and solving problems. That's important. Many times women are very happy with a comfort zone because they feel the office needs to be stable, because sometimes the home front is not stable, right? But if you stay in a position of comfort for too long, it can get challenging for you to grow, because
Yes.
you're not sending the right signals to people who are willing to give you those opportunities. Okay.
So it takes a certain amount of courage that each woman should,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
dip into and
Yes.
aim for that success. Yeah.
Yes. And often success and failure are both motivators. When
Yeah.
you fail, you know what you shouldn't do the next time, or what you could have done better the next time. This will really not come to you if you've always been part of very, very stable projects where status quo is maintained and
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
virtually, no expectation of any kind of change or innovation. Okay.
and and I would assume that, see, to add to that, it's a career path is not made up of only successes and nothing else. If you look at everyone who's
Absolutely.
successful, they've had
Yes.
a lot of failures too, and what they've
Yes.
learned from it. So yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The second aspect is honing your negotiation skills.
Absolutely.
This is an area where women have traditionally, and research shows this, that they've not had outstanding economic results through negotiation. Women get excellent emotional results through negotiation. So when you negotiate with a woman, everyone comes out feeling great, right? But financially, that negotiation doesn't sort of have the same outcomes as a man who negotiates, right? So honing your negotiation skills in general, irrespective of what outcomes you want, is a good place to start figuring out. Because as you go up the ladder, you negotiate for time, you negotiate for resources, and you also end up negotiating for the outcomes that are
Yes.
possible through your efforts. And if you don't start that, it's going to be challenging once you get to that position, because people will expect that you have had these skills in your previous positions. Okay.
So
Yeah.
just to build on that, what are some of the hurdles that a woman faces when she is negotiating for either, say, a promotion or a new role
Yeah.
or resources or
Yeah.
anything that a woman needs to
Yeah.
negotiate
So
for?
firstly, a woman, let's talk in the context of say a promotion. Okay. For example, first is you need to articulate, you need to tell your manager that you are aspiring for a promotion. This is often something that most women fail to do. And I've
Yes.
had women telling me that, but the manager needs to know on his own or her own, right? It's not possible, simply because the manager has so many people to manage and look at, right? And unless you have a telepathic connection with your manager, it's impossible that the manager will know that you have
You
such
never have
aspirations.
a telepathic connection with, you know.
Particularly not with your managers.
Definitely
So
not with your manager. Yes.
yes. So you need to tell your manager, you need to articulate that aspiration that you have, right? Whether it's taking on additional responsibility, doing a particular kind of a role or a promotion, right? So that's usually the first step, which is, like I say, the problem statement, right? Your problem statement or your objective is, I want to move to the next level, right? And the idea is not to spring this 1 month before your performance appraisal. The
Definitely.
idea is to start the new financial year with this discussion that I need to get there at a certain time. Now, what do I need to do, in your view, to be able to demonstrate that I'm good at this? Right?
That's a fabulous,
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
because then you can plan it and perform accordingly,
Absolutely.
and you have checks and balances in through the year.
Yes. And most importantly, what you've done is you've gotten yourself an ally. If you have a male manager, it becomes a male ally. If you have a female manager, it's an ally, right? This person, you've influenced this person to stay vested in your interest,
Career
in
growth.
your
Yeah.
career, right? And when you do that, 50% of the battle is already won. Okay? Thereafter, you start demonstrating through short goals how you've achieved these goals and what outcomes they have generated. Now, when it finally comes to you negotiating for that position, you have established a track record in terms
Yeah.
of your willingness to take initiative and get the job delivered, right? Now, what happens hereafter is, let's say you have multiple candidates, all of whom who have done this, right? Typically, your manager will say, okay, there are three others. Who do we choose between you and the other person, right? This is where you have to build a case, a business case, not on emotions, but on the outcomes and the return,
Facts.
right? And this is often where women will stumble. They will say, no, this has been a career aspiration for me. I discussed it with you 8 months ago. Now, why are you saying I need to build a case, right?
Yes.
This is just a test to see how do you perceive yourself in that future role. Is it just about you getting an additional pay packet and moving into a completely different delivery expectation, or is it something else? What's the value to your life, right?
And this will also showcase a certain managerial leadership
Yes,
quality, right? So
absolutely, it will. So what is usually prescribed, and this sometimes works in the Indian context also, is you don't negotiate as a woman for simply yourself and your aspirations. You should, for instance, say something like, if I were to go up the ladder, this is what it would mean for my team members. They would have access to a lot more information, access to a lot more projects that I, at the current level, am unable to give them, right? That can spur their growth. That can in turn spur the growth of the entire team and perhaps add a lot more value to the business unit that we are working for, right? That's a good approach to take, because it shows that you are not vested only in your personal growth. You are also able to see how your growth will impact those of your your team members, your businesses, and so on and so forth, right? So that is one way of negotiating. In the West, there are enough examples of women who've been very hard negotiators, but somehow the society's perception towards a woman being a very hard negotiator is not entirely positive. And particularly in the Indian context, it's better that you talk of how others will also grow when you grow, right? We are in this together, and therefore we grow.
yes, men are perceived as dynamic, and there are a lot of unflattering words used, which I will not,
Yes,
state
yes,
right now when a
that's true.
woman does this. Yes.
Yes, yes.
So that was a very good insight. In fact, this sounds extremely interesting. So I do recommend that people go through this, especially if they are looking for to negotiate for a promotion or a role change or whatever it is that
Yes,
they're looking to
yes,
negotiate for. And I think life is made up of a series of negotiations through all the
absolutely,
different aspects.
absolutely.
Yeah. So the other thing is that a lot of women take a break from work, right?
Yes.
They either become primary caretakers for children, for old parents,
Hmm.
variety of reasons, and they take a
Yes,
break.
yes.
Let's talk about, according to you, how easy is it to return after a break for a woman?
Okay. It is very difficult.
Mm.
And I say this out of personal experience because I moved when my spouse moved to the US, and that resulted in a career break very early on in my career. Okay. I moved to a different country altogether where I did not have a support system, whether professional or personal, besides just my husband.
Mm.
Okay. And it entailed me setting up my reputation, my building my credibility from scratch. I
Yes.
really couldn't make any references to my work in India because it would have been irrelevant because this was another country altogether, right? So
Yes.
returning to work means starting over, literally, for many women. That means building your credibility from scratch, demonstrating your credibility, your reliability, and dependability, right? This is an area where most women tend to falter because they believe that they will not have to do all this because, say, 5 years ago they were the project lead at so and so organization. That reputation will carry itself forward. It doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And this
That's
results in a lot of frustration for women. So one of the suggestions that I have, based on what has worked for many of the women who I have interacted with and who've made a successful comeback, two things. One, try and upskill, pick up skills in an area that you believe will be important for the kind of role that you're looking for. Especially if you're in technology, if you're in consulting kind of roles, it's important to stay abreast of what is happening. Assuming that what you sort of came with 5 years ago is still relevant in the workplace, it's not going to help you, right? So try and do certificates and certification courses. The other thing is, don't plunge in directly to a full-time job. And I see this happening with many women. They say, now I am ready, I'm going to go back and I want a full-time job. I'm willing to put in the 12 hours, 14 hours, right? Start with gigs, start with freelance opportunities, because it does two things. One, it tests your professional and your personal setup in terms of how ready you are to actually go out and put in 12 hours. So if you've had a young child at home, the child has started going to school and you believe you no longer need to stay at home and you're willing to put in 12 hours, start by taking on 2, 3, maybe 4 hour gigs and see how your family responds to you not being available for 4 hours,
yes.
right? What this also does is it helps build your resume in terms of what outcomes you've managed to get for those people for whom you freelanced. It gives you the confidence to present yourself better in front of an interviewer when you do end up going for that full-time role, which will demand, say, 8+ hours in a day, right? So these are two aspects that women can look at when they are attempting to make a comeback to work.
Very good points again. And yes, I personally really like the thing that, your credibility and your reliability has to be again,
Yeah,
uh,
demonstrated
proven,
all over again. Yeah.
demonstrated all over again. And it's also a very practical thing to think of that, don't just jump into it when you're returning. Take on
Yeah.
smaller gigs, take on part-time or freelance work,
Yeah.
build your resume,
Mm.
get your family used to the fact that you're not going to be there
Yes.
full time,
Yes.
because those emotional demands, if a child makes it, it's a lot harder to say no, because one of the things that most mothers have is guilt that you're not doing enough.
Yes. Yes.
So I think that's an extremely practical and sensible way of approaching return to work.
Yeah.
The other thing is, we everyone talks about being authentic and how it's so important to be your true self, and how
Mm.
how people will respond to you better if you're authentic.
Mm.
But we also know that gender doesn't is not an equal. I mean, gender comes in, and it's not. We're all perceived differently because of our gender.
Yes. Yes.
And what, according to you, is, how possible can a woman, how possible is it for a woman to remain authentic while she grows in her career?
Okay. It is possible to remain authentic, and I'll tell you why. We are changing as people every day, whether we realize it or no. We are changing as people. We are responding to our environment. We are adapting to the good and sometimes to the bad as well. right? It doesn't mean our core value systems have changed and our core value systems have been compromised. Okay.
Yes.
Now, what this also means is as you grow in your career, you will adapt to new skills, you will learn new skills, you will have lesser opportunities to use some of your old skills. It doesn't mean your old skills are no longer with you, you've abandoned them, right? Depending on the situation at hand, you will have to behave in a certain manner. You'll have to demonstrate using a certain set of skills that you have. Now, by no means does it mean that you don't have any other skills or you aren't anything else besides what you are in that moment. Okay. A good example is today I'm here speaking to you in the capacity of an author and an enabler for women's progress at work. But my day job is very different from this, right? Does it mean I'm being inauthentic? I don't think so. Your core value systems will always find a way to manifest themselves, no matter which role you play, whether at home, whether at work, what position you are in at work, which client you're dealing with. To that extent, most of us are authentic and we tend to remain that way. Now, the way in which you manifest yourself may change depending on the position you are in. That doesn't necessarily mean you're being inauthentic.
So learn how to remain true to your course,
Yeah,
values,
yeah.
and the way you display it may change according to how,
Yes.
what the situation, the role you're playing, all those scenarios, those external
Yes.
scenarios.
Yes.
Next, I would like to touch upon, an unsupportive workplace.
Okay.
And for women, how can we actually succeed if the workplace is unsupportive?
Okay. You can succeed if the workplace is unsupportive, but you need to have immense grit and determination, not to mention self-motivation. Okay. There are examples of women succeeding against all odds. A good example is that of Kiran Bedi, the
Yes.
IPS officer. Okay. Uh, Government roles are traditionally not known to be the most supportive, and more so for women, right? And she has been posted so frequently and she's been posted to such difficult roles, but she's transformed practically every place that she's had a tenure at, right? And she's made the very unsupportive environment conducive for her to work and deliver value, right? Has this come at a huge cost? Yes, I'm sure she has had a huge personal cost in terms of what she could have otherwise done had the environment been very supportive, right? So you can succeed, but it will take a huge amount of perseverance and a huge amount of grit to overcome and overcompensate for the lack of support at the workplace. You'll have to build that kind of support for you outside of work. You'll have to build a network where people are championing what you do,
Yes.
whether your workplace recognizes that or doesn't recognize that. So it's possible, but it is challenging and difficult.
I would add to that saying, I would assume a woman has to then decide whether she's going to do this or if there is another option of a place that would probably be more supportive,
Yes.
and how, if she can do that transfer to that other workplace, if she can move
Yes.
that, is that worth
Yes.
it? And I think it would be a personal journey also. And
Yes.
I like
Yes.
the fact that build your support system even outside the workplace, because I think it's important when you have to have motivation and self-determination. You need to have
Yes.
good self-esteem, and you need champions out there who recognize
Yes.
what you bring to the table and keep, you know, boosting you up
Yeah.
as much as possible. Because yes, while
Yes.
we have to largely do it from within for ourselves,
Mm.
it definitely helps when others recognize it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the other thing, another very important thing, is networking.
Okay.
Now, we all see, men have traditionally had their old boys club, their smoking
Yes.
corners, they've had that.
Yes.
And women have been excluded because either it is social conditioning, you can't be seen drinking and smoking with the men,
Yeah.
or you're branded in a certain manner, or it is always after work, where the extra additional workload that a woman carries at home, you
Yeah.
know, it becomes a detriment in her spending time there. So how can one do this as part of one's career? How can women network to, and grow?
Okay. So the first thing I'd like to say is don't look at networking as a bad word, as a cheesy word. And that's what happens when you talk to a bunch of women in a room and you ask them, tell me what comes to your mind when you speak of
Yes.
networking. And the first question is, it's salesy. It requires me to put myself out there and keep tom-tomming my achievements.
Mm.
Okay. Networking is not that. Networking is simply having conversations, making connections with other people. If you were to think of it, women traditionally have been better networkers than men. Men have these social construct which help them to network well. For women, it comes pretty naturally,
Yes.
right? Because we are always trying to solve some problem or the other, whether at home, whether at work, and sometimes, if more often than not, at all times, we do manage to find those solutions through some connection somewhere or the other. So the first is not to think of networking as something that's being imposed on you. It is a necessity, yes. If you are extremely introverted, the notion of networking can seem very scary. Okay. So for women who are introverted, for women who have so many other things to do in their lives, my advice is be very clear about what are the kind of outcomes you're expecting from networking. Networking can be purposeful. Most times it is purposeful, right?
Yes.
So you pick and choose where you will network, who you will network with, and for how long, and what are the potential, let's say, gains, for lack of a better word, do you expect out of these interactions. Okay. If you look at networking in a context where you're meeting people having like-minded ideas like you, right? You may not see it as much of a drain on your time, on your priorities, as you would if it's like an industry-wide conference and you really don't know, you've been asked to go there as part of work and you're very uncertain as to what is your role there. Right? So make networking purposeful. Start by networking where there is a set context. Okay? That makes it easier for you to align your interests with those of other people who will be present at that particular gathering. Right? So networking is important. It becomes less challenging if you are very clear why you want to network, what are the expectations that you have after this networking activity. Do you believe you can have a conversation with people who you've interacted with in that networking platform?
That's very important. Just I wanted to give you one example of what we found in one of the companies I worked with is um, this was largely a very Indian team from our side, which had to interact with a very Brit team from the client side.
Okay.
And we said build relationships. Now, when the minute we said build relationships, there was all these barriers on,
Yes.
how,
Yes.
what do we do?
Yeah.
So then we gave them little clues on, said, okay, the next time you go into the client's office, do you see any rugby or soccer paraphernalia? So one of them came back saying, what sports do you see? One of them came back with rugby.
Okay.
And then when we started giving them research documents on rugby, then somewhere along the way, I felt, oh my God, he's going to go there and spout stuff that he's read. So I said, why don't you try being, and it goes back to authenticity. And so why don't you try being authentic and saying, I'm interested, I'm learning about it. Could you teach me some? And the next thing you know, the client was so excited to sit down and explain the whole game, go for games.
Yeah.
And they built up their own rapport with that. And I think these things, and especially so with us women, we hesitate. While we are, I agree with you, we are more natural at it. But we're also worried that if we go out there and talk about anything other than work, will it be perceived as something else?
Yes.
You know what? It's about time we make those changes. And I agree with you. And if they perceive it as something else, nip it in the bud right then and then, make it clear that this is only,
Yes.
networking, and it makes a difference. And I think people
Yes.
tend to appreciate that also.
Yes.
Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to talk about is women helping women, right?
Okay.
Now, what, women helping women in the workplace, how important is it? Does it happen much? What is your experience in this?
Okay. So women helping women is in the workplace is what we need. Do we see enough of that? No, we don't. And there are a few reasons, right? One of the reasons why women shy away from championing other women at the workplace is because they don't know if, it'll be reciprocated.
Mm.
Okay. There aren't too many examples. I've seen women come and say, I stuck my neck out for this person, and once she got a promotion, she moved on, right?
Mm.
Didn't acknowledge the role I had to play, didn't do anything. So there is this fear that, am I just giving away all my goodwill? Am I, championing people who actually will not reciprocate that for me when I'm in a tight situation, right?
Mm.
This happens with men also, but because men do this so frequently, they don't react to it the way women react to it.
And there's a larger percentage anyway that will be
Yes.
positive, so because it's a much
Yes.
bigger pool that
Yes.
they're helping. Yes.
Correct. Okay. The other reason is also that, see, historically, women have always competed for resources, whether it was, food and money to raise their children. So there's been an element of competition there. Okay. And I see that following itself in the workplace, where somewhere in our heads we've assumed that there are only these many leadership positions, or there are only these many positions to aspire to, and you start automatically competing with a woman if you see her there. Okay. And this needs to change, because I am a firm believer that there is room for you at the top if you're willing to make the climb, right? Focus on your journey. If you don't make it to the top in one organization, you will do it in any other organization, right? So don't limit yourself into believing that there's only so much. And if I really don't fight, and if I don't have that cat fight with the other woman, I am not going to be perceived as being worthy enough to move up the ladder. Okay. There is that. And the other challenge is also that it's very challenging, difficult for women to vouch for other women, because we generally tend to have extremely high standards for whoever we want to vouch for, whether it's a man or a woman. Like, we are inherently a little more picky that way. If we believe a woman is not conforming to A, B, C, somewhere we believe she's really not worthy of our endorsement, right? And women are very different, right? Like, we might align on topic A, but we might not align on topic B or C, right? Most women will say, okay, because she's not aligning with me on all three, I can't relate to her. And because I can't relate to her, why should I endorse her, right? That's something that needs to change. We need to get less judgmental about what abilities people bring to the table. And we need to step back and be a little neutral in terms of, why are we endorsing this person, or why am I pushing for this person, right? And stop thinking all the time about, okay, is she going to do the same thing for me, right?
So I think
There
we have
might
a
be, yeah.
participant. Sorry. We have
Yes,
a
Karthik.
participant. May have
Yeah, I can see Hema. Yeah.
Your timing out looks like. So
Oh, we're running out of time?
Yeah, it's
Yeah, we
showing.
have about 4 minutes.
Yeah, so do you want
Okay.
to take one question?
One last question. Oh, okay. Do you have a question, Hema?
Hi Karthik, hi Archana, hi Saujanya.
Hi, Hema.
Hi, Hema.
Basically, I'm working as the program manager at CEOs of Namdhari's group.
Okay.
So this has been a very insightful session for me. So Saujanya has been asking like whatever the things I had in mind. So I feel like everything is answered by Archana. So, and I have one question for you. So that is like, how do you get what you truly deserve when the management doesn't seem to be recognizing those efforts?
Okay. So one of the thing in a mature organization, one of the things you would normally do is you would talk to your managers and set goals prior to you putting in the effort to go ahead and deliver on those goals, right? So when you've met those goals, at least on paper and in spirit, and you're able to demonstrate that, you can go back to with that goal sheet and talk about how you've completed, and is there anything else that the management would want you to do, right? Are there stretch goals? Do they want you to take on something else, right? Now, if at that point in time there is an issue in terms of how you perceive the completion of goals versus how they've perceived, right? Have a
Right.
discussion, have a conversation, and it is okay to tell them that you're feeling a little disappointed, that you
Okay.
put in the kind of effort, but somehow you feel the other person is not looking at it with the same enthusiasm as you've looked at it, right? And ask them for a solution in terms of how do we overcome this. Yeah, I am feeling a little low, I am feeling a little discouraged and disappointed. How do we work around this, right? Because if you try and do something else by your own without getting the consensus of the others who are important to your career progression, it might be seen as you not being receptive to any kind of feedback, or not even being open to receiving that feedback because you didn't initiate that conversation, right?
Okay.
So that's one way you could look at this.
Sure.
And I think you covered one in one of the earlier things, in the beginning itself, to sit down and say, this is where I would like to be. How and what is it that I need to do to reach this level, and start working with your management on developing and meeting those goals so that you reach that level.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Archana,
Hina, for the
your
question.
time. Yes, Arjani, over to you.
Yeah, and so I don't know if we have the
We
time
just
for
have
a
a
quick.
minute left.
Okay, so then I will not, spend time on the recap, because I
Right.
think on every question I've actually done a mini recap on all of
Okay.
them. So thank you so much for your time, Archana. And this sounds very interesting, the book. I would again suggest that, anyone who's looking to negotiate, move up in their career, take a look at it, go through it. There are some very practical approaches to, what could work for you. See what works and what are the reasons that, might be holding you back. So I think, speaking up, asking, being courageous, trying to work with the management on where you need to be, making sure that you help other